Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields and Bourbon Podcast, the podcast where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and bourbon and whiskey. I'm Jack, joined as always by my co-host Elijah. Today we are coming to you from the historic Bell House in beautiful downtown Winchester, Virginia. The Bell House is preserved and maintained by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, managing entity of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, and the official sponsor of the Battlefields and Bourbon Podcast. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a member of the Battlefields Foundation. Memberships start as low as $35 and go till you can't give no more. So not only are you supporting the podcast, but you're also supporting battlefield preservation here in the Shenandoah Valley. Elijah.
Jack.
Back at it again.
After another hiatus.
A hiatus.
Thought we weren't going to do that again.
No, it's okay. Everybody's... we look at the analytics and people are still listening in the gaps.
They haven't gone anywhere.
They're going to the well still.
Yeah.
The well's still pumping water. We've got over 40 episodes out now, so... There's
Still
enough. Like, we know you guys didn't listen to that full archaeological episode, so go back and finish it. But here we are again, another episode. We're excited. We got a guest in the room. I'll introduce him more in detail, but Steve Chesley's here. Say hi, Steve.
Hello, everybody. Jack, Elijah.
So Steve's here. We're going to be talking about a super cool topic. But before we get started with anything, Elijah, our glasses are empty. What are we sipping on?
We've got, for the first time, a Woodford Reserve product. It's going to be their Double Oaked bourbon. Surprised we've gone this long without a Woodford product, but hey, here we are.
Now, I know you guys like to hear the pop. That was a pretty good pop.
It's always, It's
really
pops are good.
Solid. But yeah, Woodford Double Oak. As you would hear in the name, Double Oak. Woodford just takes their bourbon that's been aging in that first charred new oak barrel, and they put it in another barrel.
Okay.
Another new charred oak barrel. Usually is how that goes. They age it for an extended period of time beyond their normal aging, and that gives it that really dark color that you see there in the bottle and in your glass. It's the same proof as their normal bourbon. It's 90.4 proof. No age statement on it. It is a straight bourbon whiskey.
Yeah.
72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley, and you can usually pick this up for around like $40 or $50 most places. If you get the smaller sizes, obviously they are a little cheaper. Woodford Reserve is a Brown-Forman product, so that's Brown-Forman operates Old Forester, Jack Daniels, some other big names in the bourbon industry, just like Sazerac has a portfolio with Buffalo Trace and other brands. But yeah, go ahead and give it a sip.
Well, Elijah, before we sip, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So somebody told me one time, I'm a bourbon wimp. I like to mix. I love bourbon, but I like to mix it with Coke or ginger ale. So I'm really taking a big leap here, doing it neat. Somebody told me one time to really drink it neat, you have to take it, swish it around in your mouth to kind of numb the taste buds or something, and then swallow. Is that true?
There is some truth to that. If you do like a distillery tasting, they'll tell you to take a small sip first just to acclimate your palate. Okay. You may not taste the full, profile there. On the second sip is generally the more robust flavor profile. And then if you want to mix it afterwards, go ahead and enjoy it how you want to enjoy it. But at least just to get the full experience.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going for it, baby.
All right. Yeah, off the smell too, what you guys are sipping, it's a real dark, rich, almost like chocolatey flavor. Yeah. What do you get off the taste?
Chocolatey, more of the same. It's very sweet, but like almost a little bit of like a coffee note to it.
I think you're getting that through like the barrel too. Maybe that extra.
Yeah, the extra oak does,
give you that
a lot for it.
Coffee flavor.
Boy, actually, I have to tell you, I like that.
You like it?
Yeah, I do.
Don't let
Very
your wife
mellow.
hear that. You're liking it straight.
Very mellow.
Yeah. I'm still going to mix it.
Of course,
But I like it.
No,
And I want to tell you guys, I brought my...
It's okay, Steve. Steve's
spilled.
drunk already.
I've already spilled it.
It's okay,
I brought my
Steve.
old personal mixer, but now I don't have any bourbon to mix.
We'll give you
'cause
some
I just
more.
spilled
Luckily,
it all.
we've got a whole
That's our
bottle.
first spill for the show. I
I'm
think.
surprised. Yeah, no, because
Okay, I'm not going to be
some
invited
close
back.
calls.
There you go. So Steve brought his mixer because he brought his own mini bottles of ginger ale, which we don't shame. We don't shame whatsoever. We're just glad you're participating in this wonderful elixir this evening.
Yeah, drink it how you like it.
Yeah. So you'll have to tell us too how it tastes with ginger ale. You hear Steve's mixer, mix it in the glass. Give us a review of that, Steve. Looks like a beer.
Oh, that's really good.
Even better.
Yeah.
Even better.
But I'll tell you, having it neat was good.
Oh yeah,
I will do that again. That was good.
It kind of reminds you of Old Forester when it gets to that, with that double oaking, it gets to that point that it has that deeper profile. Not that regular Woodford doesn't have that, but this more so is amplified.
And I
like it.
I like it too. I don't feel overwhelmed by a certain percentage of those grains in there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not over like too much corn. I don't taste a lot of rye or smell a lot of rye. And then it's malted barley. I don't even know if you could. I feel like no one talks about the barley when you're giving your tasting notes, but
Yeah, that's not really something that stands out unless it's a malted whiskey or that's your secondary grain. And 18% rye really isn't a whole lot. But I feel like at least with the flagship Woodford products, there's a little bit of heat and spice to it that you don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
But like with this one, it's just very muted, and it's like just all those deeper, darker notes with the sweetness in it too.
So I don't think I've ever had, and if I have, I don't remember, just the regular old Woodford.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say from your experience with the difference between the two? I mean, is it that darker, richer flavor that you're getting?
Darker, yeah, definitely that. It's the same proof, like I said. The age is only going to be, for a secondary finishing, it's probably only going to be a few months. I can't imagine it's more than a year.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's aged that much longer.
In that other barrel.
Right.
Yeah.
Or just overall that much longer than the standard stuff. I mean, a few months, maybe a year if you're really pushing it. But just that little difference there and that extra process adds a whole.
It's a brand new barrel too, like a brand new fresh bourbon barrel. That it's
as
going
far as I
into.
understand. I know some brands with their secondary finishing they may use a used barrel, but for the most part, I think Double Oaked is just another new barrel.
Which I think is like
That way you impart that
do it.
flavor
Yeah.
correctly. Yeah.
because it's already sucked up as much as the char and barrel flavor as it can
Right.
for however long it was in there.
And if I'm wrong on that, somebody will correct me, I'm sure. But I mean, from what I understand, is that they use another new charred oak barrel. If not, it's just a used barrel.
Well, now that we've all had a sip and the table's had a sip, Steve Chesley in the flesh here, ladies and gentlemen. Steve is a good friend of mine. He's a Shenandoah Guard member for the Battlefields Foundation, so he is in that upper echelon of members for the Battlefields Foundation. He's also a board member for the Kernstown Battlefield Association and a volunteer there. Which they're the Kernstown. Tell us a little bit about the Kernstown Battlefield Association for a second.
Well, yeah, I want to put in a plug for Kernstown. So they're open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays from April through October. This year, 2025, we open April 4th. One thing I want to tell everybody is that Kernstown, it's all volunteers. We give free tours there. Mm-hmm. You can come in and walk the property. We have over 5 miles of walking trails. We've just put in a lot of new signage. Again, we will give golf cart tours to people who want them because it's a fairly big battlefield. And we also give tours of the 1854 Pritchard House, which is where the Pritchard family hunkered down during the 2 battles and several engagements that took place on the property. So again, it's free. We just ask for donations.
Yeah.
And we have memberships. It's $25 a year for a single, $50 for a family. Not only do we have the core property, but just about a mile west of us, we have about 37 acres at Sandy Ridge, which we've just started clearing, and we give tours up there now. And we recently discovered a Confederate mass grave site up there.
Wow.
That we put a split rail fence around. And after the first Battle of Kernstown, it's estimated there were about 80 Confederate soldiers buried there in a mass grave. Now, around 1866, they were all disinterred and moved to Mount Hebron Cemetery in the Stonewall section of the cemetery.
Wow.
So
So Kernstown's up to a lot. It's the 25th year this year, too,
It is.
right?
This is our 25th anniversary. The association itself was formed in 1996. We secured the property in the year 2000.
Okay.
So this is our 25th anniversary, and we will be celebrating it all year long.
That's exciting stuff. Well, like those other things, Steve, before we dive into this evening's topics, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into, the Civil War? What sparked your interest? How long have you been a Civil War freak?
I really can't say I've been a Civil War. I grew up 40 miles west of Chicago. And for some reason, my father, my grandfather loved history. And we used to drive out west all the time, see all the Indian battlefields. Little Bighorn was a favorite of ours. So we were always into history. And I've been a Civil War buff ever since I was a little kid. And then, obviously, when the Ken Burns series came out, I was just ecstatic. And I was glued to the TV. And I just went nuts. And then we've lived in Kansas City, Dallas, and we were in Iowa for 20 years. And in 2012, we moved to Winchester. I had no idea the history in Winchester. The only thing I knew about Winchester was that Patsy Cline was here.
Really?
That's all I knew.
As for being a Civil War buff, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's all I knew. When I came here and discovered, that I was an hour and a half from Gettysburg, about, 50 minutes from Antietam, and that this area, this town changed hands roughly 72 times during the Civil War, I just thought to myself, man, I got to get involved. And then when I retired 2 years ago, I just went in full bore.
So you only retired 2 years ago?
That's correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought you've been retired for a while. But I didn't
No,
realize
it'll be
that.
2 years in May.
Wow.
So
that's why you're dipping your toes and
Gotta
other
keep
stuff.
busy.
But in 2014, it took me a while. I had heard about Kernstown, and I drove around, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But I finally found it in 2014. I started volunteering there, just mowing. And
That's all you
trimming.
wanted to do, right?
That's all I wanted to do was mow. I didn't want to be involved in any decision making or anything else. But in 2017, they asked me to be on the board, and I said yes, and I've been on the board ever since.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, I joined the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, and I'm also a member of the American Battlefield Trust. So I'm trying to do everything I can Civil War. But I found out that as I'm getting older, there's so much history and there's so much to know.
Yeah.
God, it's just impossible to
It
retain
is.
it all.
It's impossible. It's crazy.
Which is why I'm enjoying listening to podcasts such as this.
Yeah.
This podcast is wonderful. I'm learning a lot about Civil War history and bourbon
Yeah.
just from listening to this podcast.
Well, we appreciate that, Steve. Don't cash the check till tomorrow on that.
Okay.
But we really appreciate that. And thanks for coming on. So our topic today, when I asked you to talk about this, probably a couple months ago, I feel like we talked about it, was Second Kernstown. I feel like last year I said, let's do Second Kernstown. I said, do you think you could do Second Kernstown? And you were like, no, ask Scott Patchen, da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, okay. Well, then I found out that you were giving a talk just a couple weeks ago at the Shenandoah Valley Civil War Museum here in Winchester about Mulligan, who we'll talk about, and Second Kernstown. I said, well, darn it, Steve, you can do it. So I said, you got to do the podcast. And so that's what we're talking about. We're going to talk about the Second Battle of Kernstown, July 24th, 1864. Last year it celebrated its 160th, anniversary of the battle. And Steve, you've become immersed in it, volunteering and spending your time at Kernstown. Is this your favorite? Before we dive into it, is this your favorite of the two battles of Kernstown?
No, I think I like them both equally.
Okay. They're not your kids, Steve. You can pick one.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. No.
I do like Second Kernstown mainly because of our topic, James Mulligan, Colonel James Mulligan. He's a very unique character. And this is what's so cool about the Civil War. Every war has its personalities and has its stories to tell. The Civil War is unique in that it was all fought here in this country, and it was definitely brother against brother. I'm assuming father against son at certain times, but it split families.
Yeah,
and that's what's so unique about this war. And Colonel Mulligan is a very unique character, and we're going to get into him. I'm going to focus most of my discussion on Mulligan. I want to give a little history on him.
Yeah, take it away, Steve.
And we certainly can. We will dive into Second Kernstown because you can't talk about Colonel James Mulligan without talking about Second Kernstown.
Well, perfect. Well, fire away. Set the scene for us, Steve.
Well, so first of all, I want to acknowledge my sources, and most of what, let me say, not most, everything I know about Second Kernstown and Colonel James Mulligan comes from Scott Patchen.
Shout out Scott.
I want to recognize him as a valuable resource. His book, Shenandoah Summer, is incredible. And also, he had an article in the Blue and Gray magazine in summer of 2006. And again, it had Mulligan on the cover of it. And he talked about the early summer campaign of 1864, including his assault on Washington, D.C. So I want to acknowledge Scott as a resource. I've already talked about Kernstown. I want to focus real quickly on something about Mulligan that we've struggled with for years. I assume you'll have this picture on the cover of your podcast because nobody can see what we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
But there are, I know, 3 or 4 known photographs of Mulligan. The most popular one has him sitting in a chair with a huge medallion on his chest.
That might be the biggest Corps badge I've ever seen.
Well, there you go. That's what we're talking about. We think this picture was taken prior to the Civil War. So
it's not a Corps badge?
It is not.
Huh.
And I'll tell you why. We thought it was. And when we had people throughout the years come into Kernstown, we have a big picture of him in the Pritchard House. People always ask, what is that? We said, well, we think it's a Corps badge. But we think the picture was we're 90% certain the picture was taken prior to the Civil War. And then I looked at all the Corps badges, and while there's some close, none of them match exactly what this is. Mm-hmm. So it's been a mystery up until about 2 months ago.
Oh.
And then I'm watching the History Underground podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Another great podcast.
JD.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another great podcast.
That was the shirt I almost gave you, too. I have one of his.
Oh, you should have.
So he's in the Gettysburg Museum of History.
Yeah.
And they're touring around, and the museum curator, they're looking at different exhibits. They stop in this glass case, and there's a Confederate uniform, and attached to it is this badge. He pulls it out, and I look at it, and I say, oh my God, that is Mulligan's. Yeah. That's what Mulligan's wearing. It's exactly what Mulligan was wearing. And he said it was a Maltese cross.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Maltese cross originated with the Knights of St. John in the 11th and 12th century, and it helped. They were helping the poor and the sick. Now, the Maltese cross represents charity, chivalry, generosity to friend or foe, loyalty, and protection of the weak. And when we get done talking about Mulligan this evening, you will know that Mulligan has all those attributes.
Yeah.
So again, we are 99.9% sure that it is a Maltese cross.
Wow.
And not a Corps badge.
That would make sense because I believe that the Maltese cross, I think it's 19th Corps, if I'm rattling that off the top of my head.
And he would have been 8th.
Yeah, so that wouldn't match up. It's probably like some sort of fraternity not like a college fraternity.
Well, are you going to tell us during this what it is?
Well, Mulligan was a big Irish Catholic, very religious, very devoted to his Catholic faith, and so that's where we think it came from.
Yeah, we'll put that.
And until somebody proves me wrong, that's what we're sticking with.
That's fine. Yeah, the Mulligan picture we've been discussing, that'll be used in the episode cover art. So if you're listening to this or watching this, you should see it there.
It's like civilian clothing and.
Yeah, most the reason we think it was pre-Civil War because most Civil War photographs have the men in their uniforms.
Especially somebody with rank. Yeah.
Somebody with rank. Yeah. Got
to show that off.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right. So now I'm going to start talking about Mulligan a little bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the end of the story first.
Yep.
And then we're going to go back to the beginning.
I like this.
Get the spoilers out of the way.
I'm getting... Oh, and by the way, for those of you that are listening who have a friend or a spouse who are not into Civil War history, have them sit down for the next 20 minutes and listen to
You're giving yourself 20?
Maybe it's just 10 or 15.
No.
Listen to this part of the story.
Yeah.
Grab your favorite bourbon, get a box of Kleenex,
Oh.
and listen. I will tell you, when I first told this story, I told it in front of a group of women in a church, some church women in a Sunday school class, and I got choked up.
Yeah.
I don't get choked up anymore, but I did at the time, the first time telling this story.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty moving. So let me start. So on the afternoon of July 24th, 1864, the Second Battle of Kernstown had just ended. And about 4 to 4:30 p.m., Union forces are retreating through downtown Winchester. And one soldier in particular was in a desperate hurry to reach Martinsburg because he needed to telegraph a message to the wife of Colonel James Mulligan, who was in Cumberland at the time with her 2 daughters and her sister, and she was pregnant at the time. This soldier was Colonel Mulligan's nephew, 18-year-old Lieutenant Martin Russell. So he gets to Martinsburg. He telegraphs a message to her name was Marion that her husband has been wounded and she needs to get here as soon as possible. So after sending the telegram, Russell moves with the rest of General George Crook's army past Martinsburg, across the Potomac River through Shepherdstown. Now, after receiving the message, Marion was in Cumberland and she was, quote unquote, supporting the Union cause. I don't know what that means, but that's what she was doing. And somehow she was able to secure a ride with an Army ambulance, and she arrived on the Maryland side of the Potomac on the morning of July 26th. Now, the ambulance driver refused to take her any further. He would not cross the Potomac River because it was Confederate-held territory. So she meets up with Lieutenant Russell, who agrees to take her down to Kernstown. And sure enough, they cross the Potomac River, and within a mile, they run across their first Confederate soldier, who stops them. And again, you got to remember, Lieutenant Russell is in his uniform. He's got a lady with him. The Confederate soldier quizzically looks at these two, looks at Lieutenant Russell, and says, "Ain't you a Fed?" Mulligan answered in the affirmative and explained his mission. He said, "This is Mrs. Mulligan. Her husband's been wounded at Kernstown. I'm trying to get her down there to see him." Now, after thinking about it and careful consideration, the soldier lets them pass. And before they leave, he warns them that you will run into numerous Confederates on your way down there. So be prepared.
Yeah.
Sure enough, they run into numerous groups of Confederates who, after hearing the purpose of their journey, expressed kindly feelings toward Marion, especially after they saw she was pregnant. And many of them even told her, "We were at that battle. We saw your husband. He's alive, and he will be okay." This was a huge relief to her because she had no idea the condition her husband was in.
She just knew that he had been wounded.
She just knew he had been wounded. She had no idea how serious it was. And apparently even Lieutenant Russell didn't know how serious it was. If he did, he kept it to himself. So this was a big relief to her, and they continued on their journey. Then they're stopped by a guy named John McCausland, Confederate Cavalry General John McCausland, who has just received orders from Jubal Early to move into Pennsylvania, exact a ransom from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and if they don't pay it, burn it to the ground. So that's where he's headed. So he stops him. And Lieutenant Russell notes that McCausland was very surly and peevish. And his first inquiry to Lieutenant Russell was he wanted to find out the numbers and locations of the federal forces. And of course, Lieutenant Russell refuses to provide McCausland with that information. So McCausland instructs an orderly to, quote unquote, take these persons to the first farmhouse and let them stay there until Early disposes of them. So they're put in a farmhouse, and hours go by, and Lieutenant Russell has correctly surmised that McCausland has not said anything to Early or passed any information on to him at all. So Russell scribbles a note and passes it to a passing Confederate cavalryman and asks him, could you please pass this on to General Early? At 10 o'clock that evening, a Major Rogers from Early's staff arrives with orders directly from Early to escort the couple to Kernstown and furnish them with every convenience. But they head up to Early's headquarters, which is in Martinsburg. And they're immediately greeted by Colonel Sandy Pendleton. Now, those of you that know Civil War history know who Colonel Sandy Pendleton is. Used to be an aide to Stonewall Jackson, and now he's the aide to Jubal Early. And of course, Sandy Pendleton will be killed September 22nd at Fisher's Hill. But according to Lieutenant Russell, Pendleton notices that Marion's pregnant. And Russell notes that Pendleton actually had tears in his eyes. And he pulls Lieutenant Russell off to the side. And he said, don't tell Mrs. Mulligan, but she must be prepared for the worst, for it would be impossible that she would reach her husband while he still lived. So they take a couple hours rest, and then they continue on their journey to Winchester. But remember, Mrs. Mulligan's pregnant. I'm not sure how far along she is, but at this point, she's having fainting spells. So they reach Winchester at dawn on the morning of July 27th. And at some point after reaching Winchester, Lieutenant Russell learns that Colonel Mulligan had passed away the afternoon before. Now, he immediately blamed the cruel thoughtlessness of McCausland for preventing Marion from having one last moment with her husband. And Mrs. Mulligan was too weak to proceed any further, so Lieutenant Russell left her with a Union family in Winchester, and he proceeded back down to Kernstown. Now he goes down the Valley Turnpike. He turns down Pritchard's Lane. You know it's for those of you that have been there, you know it's a long lane to get up to the Pritchard house. Russell notices that there's a lot of wounded Union soldiers around, as well as Confederate soldiers. And he notices that Colonel Mulligan is reposing in a coffin on the front porch of the Mulligan house.
Pritchard House.
Pritchard House. Thank you.
Didn't want people, yeah.
Yeah, Pritchard
They
House.
renamed it already.
Yeah. Now, they were getting ready to have a funeral because the Confederates had an uncommon degree of respect for Mulligan, and I'll get into that later, and had arranged for his funeral. But with Russell's arrival, the funeral was canceled. And the Confederates even somewhere secured a hearse.
Wow.
And they helped Lieutenant Russell load the casket on a hearse. And a Confederate soldier drove the hearse and followed Russell back into Winchester. But before Russell leaves, he searches the property for Mulligan's brother-in-law, Marion's brother, Lieutenant James Nugent, 19 years old, who was also killed at the battle. But in spite of a search, the body is never found, and to this day the body's never been found. So we don't know if it's still buried at Kernstown somewhere or if it's in Mount Hebron with the unknown soldiers. But anyways, Marion is soon going to receive the news that not only has she lost her husband at this battle, but she's lost her brother too.
Do you know what Unionist in town she was with?
I do not.
Okay.
No, it's just sources say she was just with a Unionist family.
Okay.
Yeah. So as the wagon followed by the hearse approaches the house, Marion is sitting on the front porch, and she sees the hearse pulling up, and no words need to be spoken. She knows exactly what's happened. She screams, "Oh, James," and she falls to her knees, and she's escorted back into the house. Confederate soldiers who are in Winchester soon file past the open casket of Colonel Mulligan to pay their respects to him. He was a foe, but he was a respected foe. And I'll tell you why. But the casket is eventually loaded back on the wagons, carried back to Martinsburg, where the parties spend the night. And even General Early himself orders an escort to take them back to Union lines. They eventually make it back to Cumberland, where a private train has been secured. They load him up. They take him back to his hometown of Chicago. And he was a very prominent attorney in Chicago and a politician. He was well loved and respected. When the train arrives at the train station, there's thousands of people waiting at the train station. I've heard the number 10,000, but anyways, it's thousands. So he was well loved by the people in his hometown. He was well loved by his men. And while the Confederates didn't love him, they respected him. So that's the kind of man he was. So that's the ending of the story. And if you're ready, we'll start at the beginning.
Let's start.
You ready?
We'll backtrack, actually.
No questions so far? So parents emigrated from Ireland, and he was born June 30th, 1830 in Utica, New York. And as you already know, he was mortally wounded at the Second Battle of Kernstown, July 24th, at the age of 34, and he died 2 days later. Growing up, his mother instilled in him a love for literature, and she also imbued in him a love for the family's cherished Roman Catholic faith, which permeated every aspect of his life and molded him into a man of high moral character and principle. He got a college degree, and then he studied law. In 1851, he actually participated in an expedition to the country of Panama to survey a railroad across that country. In 1852, he returned to Chicago and continued his law studies and was admitted to the bar in 1856. And he also became involved in local politics and was a rising star in Chicago's Democratic political scene, where he became close friends with Stephen Douglas. And he supported Stephen Douglas throughout the Democratic presidential campaign. Mulligan was described as a born orator. He captivated crowds with his superb linguistics and flowing locks of hair. He was described as possessing an extraordinary ability to communicate and mingle smoothly with people, displaying an Irish flair that made him very popular. In 1857, he meets the love of his life, Marion Nugent, and was described as a beautiful Irish Chicago girl, and they were married 2 years later. Now, since his college days, Mulligan had been actively serving in a local Chicago militia company known as the Shields Guards, and by the time of the Civil War, he had risen to the rank of captain. And with a recommendation from his friend Stephen Douglas, he received authority from the War Department in May of 1861 to raise an Irish regiment, which became known as the 23rd Illinois Irish Brigade, even though it wasn't technically a brigade. His first experience at war was the Battle of Lexington, Missouri. His first orders were to reinforce a small Union garrison in Lexington, which was being threatened by about 15,000 Confederate forces under General Sterling Price. Now, Mulligan moved his 23rd Illinois down to Lexington on September 8th. They secured some Irish Home Guard forces who were already there. Mulligan had about 3,500 men. So he was outnumbered about 5-1 in this battle. He had his men go up on a high hill called College Hill. They dug in trenches and secured their fortifications up there. I'm not going to talk a lot about this battle. It may be an interesting thing for you to do in a future podcast. But this battle eventually became known as the Battle of the Hemp Bales, because while the Confederates could not secure the Union or attack the Union fortifications, they came up with the idea of soaking these round hemp bales in the Missouri River, and they pushed them up the hill as fortifications, and the Union musket balls couldn't penetrate the hemp bales. So on the morning of September, well, on the evening of September 19th, the Union fortifications were completely surrounded by these hemp bales. And on the morning of the 20th, the Confederates attempted another attack unsuccessfully. And then all of a sudden, a white flag appeared over the Union fortifications. Nobody knows where it came from. Mulligan didn't order a white flag flown. By the way, they had had 2 councils of war. The Union commanders had 2 councils of war during this engagement, and they both times voted to abandon Lexington, to surrender. Mulligan vetoed both of those. His comment was, "We're going to fight them." So when the white flag comes up, the firing ceases. General Price sends Mulligan a note saying, "Why has the firing ceased? Are you surrendering?" Now, Mulligan was known for his quick wit, and he responded to Price saying, "General, I hardly know unless you yourself are surrendering." So the fighting continues. But then Mulligan faces reality. His men are running out of food, water, and ammunition, so he finally agrees to surrender. Now, Mulligan's wife, I told you earlier, she was in Cumberland, Maryland during Second Kernstown. This time she's nearby Cumberland. She always traveled with him. She was always nearby him throughout the entire war. She's near him now. As soon as he surrenders and becomes a prisoner, she marches into General Price's headquarters and demanded to see her husband, for he, quote unquote, needed her care. Price balked, telling her that, "I'm sorry, but the colonel's quarters would not befit a lady." Marion snapped back at him and said, "Whatever quarters are good enough for Colonel Mulligan are good enough for his wife." Well, Price relented, and she stayed with Mulligan until he was exchanged on October 30th, 1861. Now, this is another interesting tidbit to this battle. Price was so impressed with Mulligan and his attitude and demeanor both during the battle and after the battle that he offered Mulligan his own horse and buggy and ordered that he be escorted back to the Union lines. And Mulligan's bravery in the face of overwhelming odds during this battle earned him the nickname the Hero of Lexington. So after that, after he was exchanged, he goes back to Chicago, and he becomes commander of Camp Douglas, a prisoner of war camp in Chicago, which basically hired prisoners, Confederate prisoners who were captured at Fort Donelson. But he's only doing that for a couple of months. Then he and his Irish brigade are ordered to go to Fort Harper's Ferry in the summer of 1862, and they were hoping to join the Army of the Potomac's famed Irish Brigade. But that was not going to happen. Instead, they served the next 2 years in the Department of West Virginia. And I want to ask you guys this. While he was in West Virginia, he oversaw the construction of Fort Mulligan. Either one of you guys been there?
Never heard of it, to be honest with you.
I've given tours of people who, when we point out Mulligan, they say, "Oh, we know of a Fort Mulligan in West Virginia." Yeah, he built that, and it's still a tourist attraction in West Virginia today.
Where in West Virginia?
It's in Grant County, West Virginia.
Okay.
I think it's
Petersburg?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Petersburg, I'll tell you later, that's where Mulligan gets his, that's where the Confederates find their newfound love for Mulligan. So now we're going to talk about the events leading to the Second Battle of Kernstown. Now, I'm not going to go into details about the beginning of Early's 1864 battle campaign.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
It's been done.
Have you guys already done that one?
It's been mentioned.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, I'm thinking
it's another episode.
I'm
but-
thinking if you haven't done that podcast, you will.
Yeah, at some point.
So I'm not going to go into that. Other than to say that after Union Commander David Hunter retreated into West Virginia after the Battle of Lynchburg, the valley was laid wide open for Early to head down the valley towards Maryland and Washington with no federal forces blocking his way. So instead, I'm going to take up the story where he is approaching Washington, D.C. And we got to remember, Lee's objective here was he was sending Early to the valley because Lee was hoping that Early could draw Union troops away from Grant down at Petersburg.
Just like what Jackson did back in 62.
And maybe delivering a decisive blow to the Federals. And Early came very close to doing that. As he headed to Washington, D.C., he ran into Federal forces at Monocacy. And even though Early was able to defeat the Union commander Lew Wallace at that battle, the battle allowed Grant enough time to send reinforcements up to Washington. Now, Early's army arrived in front of the Washington defenses midday on July 11th after what was described as a grueling march. They had just fought the Battle of Monocacy, and supposedly it's over 100 degrees, and the men are just in terrible shape. And because of the weather, thousands of Confederates were straggling, which meant Early's army on the 11th was nowhere near full strength. So he delayed his offensive till July 12th. And however, on the morning of the 12th, Early confirmed that Union reinforcements had arrived, made up of the Union 6th Corps and a small detachment of the 19th Corps, and they had arrived at Fort Stevens. And after a small engagement and some sniper fire, Early's army slipped away, and it would be a day before the Federals got organized enough to mount a pursuit. But Early made one of my favorite comments in the Civil War after he's leaving Washington. He tells his staff, he says, well, we haven't taken Washington, but we sure scared the hell out of old Abe.
Which, that's been debated, too, if he
said it that way or said it at all?
But if old Abe was actually scared.
Well, if you had Confederate forces approaching your city, wouldn't you be a little nervous?
I don't know if he was scared. He was probably more mad than anything. I think we talked about this with Noyalis, or Noyalis has talked about it before for Cool Spring, because it's the aftermath of that. And I think he starts off that book with that quote. And I think we talked about it in our episode.
We've mentioned it.
Yeah.
I think it was in that context, though.
Yeah. Fire away, Steve. Sorry.
Well,
I don't think Lincoln. I bet he was mad, but I don't think he was scared.
Mad that it was allowed to happen.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe he wasn't scared also, because this brings me to a footnote to this story. It's the only time in history that a sitting president has been fired on in war. Now, Lincoln, when the 6th Corps arrived at the Potomac River, Lincoln was there to meet them, and he actually led them to Fort Stevens. Which definitely impressed the men. And he went out to Fort Stevens to observe the action. And supposedly, depending on what you read, he was in his frock coat, he was in his stove pipe hat, and he was standing on the parapets of Fort Stevens. Now, next to him was a Union sergeant by the name of Cornelius Crawford, who was standing 3 feet away from Lincoln. And a sniper shot hit the Union Sergeant Crawford in the thigh.
Oh.
And he fell backwards. And he survived. And there's multiple stories about what happens next. According to one story, which is my favorite, but probably not true, a Union soldier standing next to him by the name of Oliver Wendell Holmes, future Supreme Court Justice, grabbed Lincoln by the collar, dragged him down, stating, "Get down, you damn fool." Now, Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote that several years later that happened. However, other stories from people that were there discount that and say that it was actually Union General Horatio Wright who ordered Lincoln to get down off the parapet. Now, according to Horatio Wright's story, which I think he wrote in 1870, he said he ordered Lincoln down and Lincoln disobeyed. And Wright supposedly said, "I know you're the commander-in-chief, but while you're in this fort, I'm the commander, and I order you down." Lincoln supposedly turned around and smiled at him and says, "Well, I can't disobey an order," and he got down. Now, I've heard another story where it was actually the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who was the one that talked Lincoln off the parapet. So there's three different stories to this. I have no idea which one's accurate. I love the Oliver Wendell Holmes story. "Get down, you damn fool." But that's probably not the accurate one. But Confederate Major Jedediah Hotchkiss described Early's 1864 Maryland raid as the most successful expedition we have ever made into the enemy's country. It's the first time the Confederate soldiers had actually seen the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. They were that close.
Yeah.
And firing on a U.S. president.
Yeah.
So Early's army was now being pursued by the 6th Corps commander, Horatio Wright, and Major General George Crook. And much of Early's army ended up camped at Snicker's Gap, which led to the Battle of Cool Springs on July 18th, and then the Battle of Rutherford's Farm on July 20th. And now we're going to get to Kernstown. So again, we can't talk about Mulligan without talking about Kernstown. In July of 1864, Mulligan finally gets a chance to lead his men in open field combat. And his first opportunity came on July 3rd when he led a brigade repulsing Jubal Early's Confederate cavalry at Leetown. Isn't Leetown one of your tour spots?
Yeah, it's in Jefferson County,
Yeah.
West Virginia.
I'm going to miss that one.
I don't think we're going to talk about the July 3rd action, but
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
you won't miss that part.
So the Battle of Second Kernstown was fought because Union General Horatio Wright, who had been put in charge of pursuing the Confederates after they were on the doorsteps of D.C., had come to the incorrect conclusion on July 20th, after the Federal victory at Rutherford's Farm, that Jubal Early was leading his men out of the valley and back to Richmond to support Robert E. Lee. Where he got this information, I don't know. But the fact was that Early was just concentrating his forces in and around Strasburg at this time. And while the Battle of Rutherford's Farm was happening on July 20th, Horatio Wright's force of 25,000 men crossed the Shenandoah River. But since Wright incorrectly determined that Early was in full retreat toward Richmond, he ordered the 6th and 19th Corps back to Washington, leaving only General George Crook's small army of West Virginia, which numbered about 11,000 to 12,000 men. Now, with Wright's departure, the Federals went from having a 2-to-1 numerical advantage to Early having slightly outnumbering the Federals. And in addition, we got to remember Early had the advantage of having much more experienced leaders in his army than Crook did. Early had such experienced commanders as former Vice President John Breckinridge, who served as the Corps commander, and under him were the cream of the crop of the Confederacy. He had Gabriel Wharton, John B. Gordon, Robert Rhodes, and Stephen Ramseur, all very experienced, capable commanders. And Wright's decision in sending 2 corps back to D.C. did not sit well in Washington. Assistant Secretary of War Charles Dana stated, "Wright started back as soon as he got where he might have done something worthwhile." Lincoln chimed in by saying, "Wright feared he might come across the rebels and catch some of them." So they were not happy with him. And on July 22nd, Union General George Crook marches into Winchester and reorganizes his force, giving Colonel Joseph Thorburn command of the 1st Division, Colonel Isaac Duval command of the 2nd Division. Now, he had a problem because Mulligan had seniority over both of these men. So Crook had to...
What was Mulligan's rank?
Mulligan was a colonel.
Okay, so they were all colonels then.
Yeah, but for some reason he had seniority over the other two. So Crook had to create a smaller 3rd Division for Mulligan.
Did it just for him?
Just for him. Now, there were also 2 cavalry divisions, one under Brigadier General Alfred Duffier. Am I pronouncing that right?
I say Dufay.
Dufay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Duffy? You could say
I'll say Dufay. I'll try to say Dufay. And William Averill, both of whom Crook did not like and did not trust. And apparently he didn't think much of Mulligan either. And the feeling was mutual. After their first meeting between Mulligan and Crook, Mulligan noted in his diary that I'm taking Crook's measure and his name suggests it. On July 22nd and 23rd, there was skirmishing south of Kernstown between Union Confederate cavalry forces. Crook's cavalry commanders reported that a large Confederate force was in their front. So that morning, Crook instructed Colonels Mulligan, Thorburn, and future President Rutherford B. Hayes to march their commands to Kernstown and push the enemy back and ascertain their numbers. However, by the time the Federals had arrived, most of the Confederates had retreated back down to Newtown, today's Stevens City, and there was only feeble resistance from the Confederates by the time they got there. Hayes reported this. Hayes was one of Crook's. Hayes did not trust a lot of people. He did trust Hayes. Hayes reported this back to Crook, who concluded that the Confederate probe was simply a rearguard action protecting Early's return to Richmond. So now, although the Confederates had withdrawn, Mulligan had a deep sense that they had not seen the last of them, and he spent the rest of the afternoon reconnoitering the front with Crook. But they found nothing because they only went about 2 miles south of Kernstown and didn't make it all the way to Newtown, where the Confederate cavalry was actually camped. Crook concluded that the Confederates had retreated, but Mulligan believed that Early would halt his retreat and then assume the offensive again. And Mulligan tried to impress this on Crook over and over again, and Crook would have none of it. However, Crook did leave Mulligan's small division at Kernstown just as a precaution, and then he and Hayes and Thorburn retreated, or not retreated, but went back to Winchester. Now, by about 5:30 p.m. that evening, Mulligan had deployed his artillery and established his camp up on Pritchard's Hill. Now, for those of you that don't know the Kernstown battlefield that well, when we give tours, Pritchard Hill is the focal point. That's the first place we take everybody because of all the battles and skirmishes that took place at Kernstown, Pritchard Hill is the focal point. It's just west of the Valley Turnpike. It was the only macadamized road in the area at the time, meaning it was hard-packed gravel. So any army trying to come into Winchester from the south with horses and artillery and wagons would be using the Valley Turnpike.
And going right past Pritchard's Hill.
And going right past Pritchard's Hill. And back in the day, in the 1860s, Kernstown was all farmland. Very few trees, and the only buildings,
You're good.
the only buildings there were farm buildings.
Yeah.
So you could stand on Pritchard's Hill and you could see miles down the Valley Turnpike. And you could even see the dust the Army was kicking up before you could see the men. Today, when you go on Pritchard's Hill, it's still a great view. On a clear day, you can see the Blue Ridge Mountains to the east. You can see the Allegheny Mountains to the west. You can look straight ahead and see Signal Knob, the Massanutten Mountain. One thing you can't see is the Valley Turnpike because of all the development and all the trees.
Yeah.
So, but it's still an eminence, and and this is where Mulligan was camped that night. And that evening, Mulligan relaxed, and he was relaxing in front of a campfire with his men from the 23rd Illinois Irish Brigade. And also with him was his 19-year-old brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Nugent, and his nephew, Lieutenant Martin Russell. And that evening, they all discussed the pending danger of Early's army, and there was an uneasiness in the camp. That same evening, Early in Strasburg had just learned from Union prisoners that the 6th and 19th Corps under Horatio Wright had left for Washington. I can't imagine Early's excitement at hearing this news, but he immediately makes the determination that they will attack at once. And this is something that always surprises me during the Civil War. I'm going off tangent a little bit here, but it seems to me that whenever they have prisoners, all these prisoners talk. I mean, there's
So
no more name, rank,
information.
and serial number. I've heard so many stories where, well, we heard from Confederate prisoners that this was happening. We heard from Union prisoners that this was happening. You know, if
No one kept their lips sealed.
they fed the enemy information that was pivotal to their success. It just seemed to happen over and over and over again.
Nowadays, you got to waterboard somebody to get something
Yeah, that's
out of them.
right.
They were like, "Do you want a nice bed?" And they're like, "The 2 corps are out of the valley.
Yeah,
Attack." So, yeah, that's funny you bring that up.
Yeah. So at 4 a.m. on July 24th, the Confederate forces are moving out of Strasburg. We got about 16,200 men who are marching down the Valley Turnpike towards Winchester. Now, July 24th, 1864 was also Sunday. So Mulligan and his men rose early and took part in Mass.
On Pritchard's Hill?
On Pritchard's Hill. And when the Sunday prayers ended, Colonel Mulligan sat in his headquarters ambulance, again on the hill, telling jokes and laughing with his men to help ease their tension. And at 8 a.m., Mulligan ordered his men into line of battle on Pritchard's Hill. Now, again, I can't repeat this enough. Despite repeated reports from his cavalry commanders stating that they were facing a large Confederate force, George Crook disregarded the reports due to his personal dislike for Averill and Dufay.
Dufay.
I have to keep saying Dufay. He was French, wasn't he?
I don't know. But we're Americans, Steve.
Okay.
He was.
Okay. So, Crook concluded that there had been skirmishing for the last 48 hours down and around Kernstown. And Crook saw that the Confederates were just repeating their performance for the previous days, and he was growing extremely impatient with continued reports of a large Confederate force that had yet to materialize. Now, Mulligan, again, is on Pritchard's Hill, and he's feeling very confident with his position on the high ground and his ability to defend it. Mm-hmm. He's probably remembering how the high ground had helped the Federals defeat Stonewall Jackson at the first Battle of Kernstown. And Mulligan describes Pritchard's Hill as follows: "It is no doubt the best in this range of the country, and if we will not be ordered from it, I have no fear of the result." However...
When did he write that down?
That's a good question. I thought about that. Probably when he was still up there. He had a diary that he kept.
I guess you do have a little bit of downtime. The Army's still coming towards him. So
a little bit of downtime.
Yeah.
I mean,
now it's interesting as a side note. So he's ordered eventually, not yet, but he's eventually ordered off Pritchard's Hill by Crook, and he follows that order. In the first Battle of Kernstown, the Union commander, James Shields, was wounded the day before, and he's holed up in Winchester. And like Crook, he doesn't believe Stonewall Jackson's army is out there. He thinks it's just Turner Ashby cavalry. So he orders Kimball off the hill. Now, Kimball is on the hill, and he looks and he sees something he hadn't seen for the last couple of days. He sees infantry. So he disobeys the order. So there's a good contrast here.
Of what happens when...
Kimball disobeyed the order, secured the high ground, and it ended up winning the battle. Now, I'm not saying Federal forces would have won the battle if Mulligan had stayed on the hill, because they were so vastly
When you mean
outnumbered.
order him off the hill, where does that put Mulligan? Like down by the stone wall on Pritchard's Lane?
No. So I'll get to that.
Okay.
I'll get to that.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So as the day progressed and the Federals are confronting more and more Confederates, Mulligan again sensed that he was facing a huge, substantial Confederate force. So he sends his 19-year-old brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Nugent, with a message for Crook, who was back in Winchester. Nugent warns Crook of the development and repeated Mulligan's viewpoint that Jubal Early was present in force. Crook responds to Nugent as follows: Colonel Mulligan is mistaken. I have full and accurate information. Where he got this from, I don't know. There is nothing in his front but a few bushwhackers. I have sent General Averill's cavalry to the rear. Colonel Mulligan must move forward. Crook then gets angry and he questions Mulligan's tenacity. And he states, well, I haven't heard a half dozen shots fired this morning. Now, Nugent is getting a little irritated with the general, and he snaps back, General, if you'll get a little nearer the front, you may hear as many as a dozen. Well, Crook then gets angrier still, and he snaps back, you tell Colonel Mulligan instantly and persistently to advance, and tomorrow I will settle with you. Unfortunately, he doesn't get to settle with Nugent because Nugent doesn't survive this battle.
Yeah.
But after Nugent departs, Crook actually has second thoughts and realized that maybe Mulligan's small division might need some reinforcements, although he believes that they're still facing just one or two divisions. So Crook summons his two most trusted colonels, Rutherford B. Hayes and Isaac Duval, for a conference. Crook informs the officers that the enemy is conducting a reconnaissance in force, and we're probably going to have to fight a little. So he orders Hayes to support Mulligan's left flank on the Valley Turnpike, but he kept Duval's division, division in reserve. I need a swig.
Yeah. Ginger ale's getting flat.
So Crook then mounts his horse and rode out to confer with Mulligan, who was still on Pritchard's Hill. And again, believing that they were only probably facing one or two divisions, Crook immediately orders Mulligan off Pritchard's Hill and to advance his division, informing him that Hayes's brigade would advance on his left. So Mulligan and Crook are on Pritchard's Hill, and Mulligan immediately points out the latest Confederate dispositions, and Crook could see that Mulligan also needs support on his right. So he sends a message to Thorburn to send a brigade under Colonel George Wells through the woods on Sandy Ridge. And Sandy Ridge is the high ground just west of the Pritchard's Hill, where Kernstown also owns about 37 acres up there. So Wells is going to cover Mulligan's far right, and then he posted another brigade under Colonel William Ely in front of the batteries in the center. So Ely and Mulligan's lines are going to advance together. I'm sorry, I keep hitting that. With Ely covering Mulligan's immediate right flank. So remember, let's go back. In addition to Early having the experience of seasoned commanders that I already mentioned, his men were battle-hardened and tested. He had some of the best in the Army. And most of these men knew this terrain extremely well. They had been there a couple of times before. Many had fought here with Early at the Second Battle of Winchester, when he used the heights of Sandy Ridge to chase Federals off of Pritchard's Hill. And many had also been there in March of 1862 under Stonewall Jackson. So not only did Early have very experienced commanders, but he had very experienced, knowledgeable men who knew this terrain and knew exactly where to go and what to do. So Hayes is going down the Valley Turnpike, and he had never met Mulligan before. And he's going down the Valley Turnpike, and as he's doing so, he looks to his right down Pritchard's Lane, and he sees a man on horseback, an officer on horseback coming down Pritchard's Lane wearing a green shirt, riding out towards him. Hayes says, "Colonel Mulligan, I presume?" "Yes, sir," replied Mulligan. "I presume you are Colonel Hayes." The two men shook hands and discussed their orders. Mulligan stated that my orders are to attack whatever's in front. "Very well," replied Hayes, who stated that those were also his orders. Mulligan informed Hayes that there were reported Confederates on the right on Sandy Ridge, and Hayes reported, "Yes, I've heard that there's Confederates also on our left, although I've not seen them yet." Now, but Crook's orders permitted Mulligan and Hayes no discretion. Crook had already rebuked Mulligan several times, and Mulligan was not going to disobey orders. He was going to follow orders. Hayes agreed and stated, "Well, it's just as well we go forward as we are gone up anyway." So they knew what was about to happen to them. They could see something that for some reason Crook could not see. So Mulligan galloped back to the Pritchard farm, passing by the 13th West Virginia. And as he does so, one West Virginia soldier recalls, "I shall never forget his appearance as he rode past our lines, just in the commencement of the fight. Such a look of nobleness I never before saw on a man's countenance, as with coat off, revealing his green shirt, emblematic of his native land, and without his hat, his locks streaming in the air. He arose in the saddle and gave vent to his feeling, explaining, 'Bully boys, brave boys, stand up to it, keep your line unbroken.'" However, in spite of all of Mulligan's bluster, he soon comes upon an old friend, and he remarks, "They are just too many for us. We are going to have to retreat." Mulligan clearly understood what Crook had yet to realize, and that was that the best the Union forces could hope for was an orderly withdrawal from the field. Mulligan then organizes his men, and they begin to attack with 1,200 men, attacking John B. Gordon's 2,800-man division, who's directly in their front. Now, however, Mulligan's brigades could get no further than the Opequon Church. His men shelter behind stone walls that are surrounding the churchyard and tombstones in the cemetery next to the church. Now, I've heard that that cemetery next to the Opequon Church is the oldest cemetery in the Shenandoah Valley. I know the founders of the Pritchard farm, the Hogues, are buried there, and there's 6 Revolutionary War soldiers buried there. And if you go there today, you can see some pockmarks still in the headstones from when musket balls hit them.
Wow.
During this battle. So Crook must be on the battlefield at this time. He must be still hanging out on Pritchard's Hill because he's seeing what's going on, and his impatience with Mulligan's failure to advance beyond the church is growing with each passing minute. Now, with the entire Union battle line encountering stiff Confederate resistance, Crook still fails to realize what the hell is going on. He shifted Ely's brigade, who, again, if you remember, is covering Mulligan's right. He shifts them back up to Sandy Ridge. Crook does this. Now, in the heat of the battle, they forget to inform Mulligan that his right flank is now completely open. There's nobody there. Now, Mulligan's left flank, where Rutherford B. Hayes is, he's marching down the Valley Turnpike, and they get ambushed by about at least 2,500 Confederates who are hiding behind a hill running perpendicular to Hayes's left flank. And they're almost completely annihilated, with Hayes's old 36th Ohio taking the brunt of the Confederate fire. A Union veteran of the battles of Antietam and Chickamauga recounted that enlisted men went down as I never before saw them fall. And that's pretty impressive considering that this guy was at Antietam and Chickamauga. Hayes and what was left of his brigade eventually had to retreat up Pritchard's Hill. And now Mulligan's left flank is wide open. So as a result, Confederates under former Vice President Breckinridge were on Mulligan's left flank, while North Carolina and Virginia Confederates under Stephen Ramseur were on Mulligan's right. At the same time, Georgians under Confederate General John B. Gordon were pushing in Mulligan's front. A Colonel Robert S. Rogers of the Union's 2nd Maryland Eastern Shore noted, "It was apparent that we were much outnumbered and flanked, both right and left." Mulligan then pulled his regiments back behind the stone wall along Pritchard's Lane, with the 10th West Virginia on the right of the line and his famed 23rd Illinois Irish Brigade on the left. Now, after seeing Mulligan's men pushed back behind the stone wall, Hayes's brigade pushed back up Pritchard's Hill, and Thorburns' entire division pushed back on Sandy Ridge. At last, Crook finally realizes what the hell is going on, and he orders Thorburn back to Winchester. At this time, Confederate sharpshooters from Georgia are creeping closer, and they lay in a dry ditch known as Hoag's Run, which is probably 100 yards in front of the Pritchard Lane stone wall. And they started picking off the Union soldiers from the 10th West Virginia and 23rd Illinois. In addition, Confederate sharpshooters also lay in rock outcroppings to the right of the Federal line, and they were lacing the Federal right with plenishing rifle fire. And with his trademark emerald green shirt, Mulligan is waving his hat over his head. He urges his men to hold the line. As he rode past the 10th West Virginia, he shouted, "Give it to them, brave Virginians." But shortly after he headed to the left of the line, 10th West Virginia, holding the right, crumbled under the pressure of charging Confederates and retreated up Pritchard's Hill. Mulligan then rode up behind his beloved 23rd Illinois Irish Brigade. Waving his hat in the air, he rose up in his stirrups and shouted, "Stand firm, 23rd." A Private Edmund O'Dwyer noted, "Never did he look better than when riding along the line of battle at Winchester." At about 2 p.m., Mulligan has determined it's time to conduct a fighting retreat. He calls to his men, "You may fall back, my boys, but fall back in order. I will stay with you." Shortly after he utters these words, a Confederate bullet smashes into his thigh, compelling him to dismount. His brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Nugent, sprinted to his side and called for others to help our stricken colonel. Soon men were all around Mulligan attempting to carry him from the field back up over Pritchard's Hill. However, as you can imagine, the gathering of men and flags around the, around the stricken colonel attracted the unwanted attention of Confederate sharpshooters who were on the left, in front, and on the right. Mulligan was watching helplessly as his loyal men were shot down at his side. He said, "Leave me, boys. It's no use sacrificing yourselves." The color sergeant cursed and shouted, "We will never leave our colonel." In spite of his wound, Mulligan scolded him and said, "Sergeant, don't swear." 2 more bullets then struck Mulligan in rapid succession, one passing through his shoulder, the other going through his chest. His brother-in-law, Lieutenant Nugent, was holding the Stars and Stripes when a musket ball struck him in the head, killing him instantly. He fell down into the flag, and the flag wrapped around him. Mulligan said, "It's no use. Lay me down and save the flags." His men again refused, but Mulligan commanded, "You can do me no good. Save your colors." His men retreated with the colors and laid him down along Pritchard's Lane and sprinted up over the hill. Now, shortly afterwards, the Confederates are overrunning the position. A Georgian saw Mulligan lying near the Pritchard house and could hear him moaning in agony. The soldier later stated, "Though an enemy, we could not refrain from sympathizing with him in his suffering, for he had the reputation of being a magnanimous foe. Confederates then carried the wounded Mulligan into the Pritchard house. They brought in Father James Sheeran, the Catholic chaplain of the Irish and French Louisiana Brigade, to administer the sacraments of communion and last rites to the dying Mulligan. Mrs. Pritchard offered him a glass of brandy to soothe his pain, but he politely refused and thanked her, saying, "In all my life I never drank, and now that I am come to die, I think it is too late to begin." Does anybody ever know of an Irishman who didn't drink?
That's a first.
That's a first. I'm going to drink to that.
Yeah. Catholics like to drink too, right?
Wine.
Catholics, I think, are big drinkers.
Yeah. Don't come at us in the comments.
Yeah. The ones
All
I
good
know
fun.
are.
Yeah.
Let's preface it by saying that. The ones I know. So let's go back to why Mulligan was so respected by Confederates. While serving in West Virginia, he had garrisoned in the small town of Petersburg, which was a decidedly Confederate town at the time. Mulligan had a reputation he would not permit his men to loot, burn, steal, and he often fed the population. His fair, humane treatment of local civilian population was repaid in his final hours. A Confederate surgeon from Patton's brigade had learned of Mulligan's kindness and generosity towards the town's citizens from his own sister, who resided there, and wrote him a letter as to how kindly Mulligan had treated the civilians. Upon hearing of Mulligan's condition, the surgeon, Andrew R. Barbie, went to the Pritchard house and cared for Mulligan until he died. He died as Mrs. Pritchard cradled his head in her arms. Upon his death, even the Richmond newspapers paid him respect and issued words of condolence. Peace to the ashes of General Mulligan. He was that rare man in the Yankee Army, a generous adversary. So though this battle was decidedly a major Confederate victory, it was to be their last in the Shenandoah Valley. After the battle in the burning Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, July 30th, Lincoln and Grant made the decision that we've had enough of the Shenandoah Valley. They put General Phil Sheridan in charge of about 24,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. And then you had the battles of 3rd Winchester on September 19th, Fisher's Hill on September 22nd, Tom's Brook on October 9th, Cedar Creek on October 19th, all of which were Union victories. And of course, you had the famous burning of the valley in late September and early October. The long Confederate domination of the Shenandoah Valley was over. And let me go back to the Maltese cross that Mulligan is wearing. Symbolizes charity, chivalry, generosity to friend or foe, loyalty, protection of the weak. I think based on what I've just discussed with you, these are all attributes that Mulligan had. And that concludes my talk.
Wow.
Now, you guys did not have many questions.
Well, you were telling such a good story.
No,
I
that was
was
a good story.
I was waiting for all these
No,
questions
but you were doing
that I would not be able to answer. So I appreciate you
that was a
not
good
asking
story.
questions.
I was thinking this whole time, Will Eichler from Civil War Digital Digest, good friend of the show, guest of the show. When he listens to this episode, he's going to be thinking of this as a short film the entire time.
That is a perfect.
I mean,
yeah,
this story, I was thinking of it too. It's like I don't know how this works by any means, but it's almost like you could put him on the saint level of a guy, Saint Mulligan. I mean, it sounds like he lived a life and acted a certain way and did good deeds, but was a warrior. But I can see Will listening to this and wanting to eat it up with I mean, it's just one of those. But the thing is, there's thousands of these stories
Exactly.
that we know took place, and this is just one of them.
Can you imagine all the wives, sisters, brothers, fathers who heard their significant other had been wounded and tried desperately to get to them or to find them?
Well, just like was it the Bartons here in town? That whole scenario.
Oh
with
my gosh, yes.
the boys dying
One of
and
the sons dying at first Winchester.
yeah, and so I mean, there's tons of these stories. And this is just one of the.
This is just one of many.
One of those amazing ones, though. I knew you were going to be a good person to tell this story, Steve, back when I did that tour of Second Kernstown over the summer, because as we were walking through the Pritchard House, and if anybody plans to tour this portion of the Kernstown battlefield, reach out to the Kernstown Battlefield Association. Ask for Steve Chesley, because you can get him to drive you around the golf cart. He's a good driver. He's only gotten a couple tickets.
Yeah.
But having him take me through the Pritchard House was amazing. And as you began the story, I remembered back to being there and how much the story I think meant to you then. Before you researched it even further, I mean, I think you definitely have a soft spot for Mulligan.
I do, and it's so important that if people listening have never been to the Kernstown battlefield, come.
And you can picture all these places you were talking about.
You can see Hoag's Run, where the Georgian sharpshooters were that picked Mulligan off.
The big boulders, the stone wall.
The boulders where the Confederate sharpshooters were firing into the right flank of the Union forces. Those boulders are there. Again, the stone walls are. We know approximately where Mulligan was shot.
Well, and you can see Pritchard's Hill. You can stand up on the hill and have the same view he had. And yeah,
exactly. And one thing I want to mention, I forgot to say that. So Kernstown is open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and we do this all the time. If there's a group coming in from out of town, or and they're only going to be there Tuesday and Wednesday, call us, leave a message. We will open up for you. We will give you a tour.
Yeah.
We have enough docents that somebody would be available to give you a tour, even during the week when we're not open. So just reach out to us.
Yeah. Elijah, anything you want to add?
No, that was a good story. The only thing I Uncle Phil might be
the crook slander.
Displeased with the crook slander.
No, but I like this. Yeah. Phil, if you're listening and you got to this point, you gotta this is the part of being a historian. You gotta weigh your options.
Different perspective.
Our good friend Jonathan Royales is about to come out with a certain book about a certain general that may have not liked Crook in the later years. And, it's not going to be good to look for Crook either. So Uncle Phil's going to have to come back on. And
correct me if I'm wrong. Crook made some serious misjudgments at this battle.
100%.
But at 3rd Winchester, he was good.
Hill.
At Fisher's Hill, he was good.
Yeah.
Now, at the Battle of the Rosebud in 1876, he wasn't so good. But
listen, stuff happens.
We all have our moments.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you learn that Crook may have been not the best independent commander, but as a commander, under someone, a subordinate commander, he did a good job at Fisher's Hill and 3rd Winchester.
He did, and I think it was because at Fisher's Hill and 3rd Winchester, he was under the command of Sheridan.
That's what I was
orders.
saying. Yeah.
At this battle, he's in command.
Yep.
And he makes some misjudgments, and for some reason, he distrusts the people who are giving him accurate information.
Yeah.
I don't know why. So maybe if he had been under the command of Sheridan and 2nd Winchester, things would have been different.
Listen, I like Crook just as much as Uncle Phil, but
I just find it odd to order an attack from your position on the hill. Why not hold that? That's a great position.
That's the high ground.
That's a great position.
Let them
come
never
to you.
give up the high ground.
At first Kernstown, they held the high ground, and Jackson was forced to move to Sandy, bring the fight there.
Yeah.
And hold the high ground, because you'll go, and that's why you bring up a great point, Steve. To understand this, you got to go there too.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of the podcast, battlefields and bourbon, going there to start your tour up at Pritchard's Hill and then feel like an idiot driving back down to fight at ground level with your enemy. I mean, you really get to see it. I mean, it's like, God, now you're standing down here and you're looking back up at Pritchard's Hill thinking, I could be there, but I'm down here.
Right.
So you got to go there, folks. If you've never been, you got to go to all these battlefields we've been talking about.
You do. You have to. You're required.
You're required. This is your payment as a listener. So,
And I just want to say that to the listeners, support Kernstown, become a member, but also support the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, because I don't know what you guys have saved. What, over 9,000 acres?
no, 7,500. We're working on 9.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
we're working on 9.
But you guys have been a huge help to Kernstown.
Yeah.
We consider you as a pivotal partner in land preservation, and we all know what's happening to Frederick County and Winchester. It's just the development is just going through the roof, and we need to work together to save these properties, and you guys do an outstanding job. So support the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation.
And support Kernstown. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, give it 5 stars, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.